Did you know that before ADHD was called ADHD, it was called brain damaged, brain injured, hyperkinetic impulse disorder, clumsy child syndrome, defect of moral control, organic brain dysfunction? I'm not even kidding. So how did we go from brain damaged and brain injured to attention deficit hyperactivity disorder? From ancient mythology to academia to children's stories and even Hollywood, we're gonna look at it all. So stick around, because we're gonna chase ADHD throughout all history to find some answers. Let's start with academia first. So our story starts with Sir Alexander. Not this Alexander, but this one. Sir Alexander Crichton. So this guy was the first to make the difference between two kinds of disorders of attention. On one hand is the disorder of distractibility, inability to sustain attention, and poor inhibition. And on the other hand is the disorder of low power or motivation, arousal, and selective attention. So after he got his degree from the University of Leiden in Netherlands, he decided to go on a European medical tour to study insanity. I'm not sure why everywhere I read this information, the European medical tour is between quotation. Maybe he just went on a sabbatical to enjoy the famous French orgy. Anyway, right after his European tour, he quickly became interested in mental illness because he was drawn to those cases of insanity. And just so we know what insanity was described at the time, here's a short definition. Lack of mental capacity required by law. Yeah, at the time, anyone who wasn't academically educated was some type of insane. Right after, he published this book, An Inquiry into the Nature and Origin of Mental Derangement, comprehending a concise system of the physiology and pathology of the human mind and a history of the passions and their effects. What a long title, man. So in this book, he gives the definition of what attention is. And he says that attention is when any object of external sense or of thought occupies the mind in such a degree that a person does not receive a clear perception from any other one. He is said to attend to it. Okay, so from this definition, we can infer that he basically believes that a healthy attention can vary within a normal range, and that distractibility or inattention is not necessarily pathological. And now, once we have a definition of what attention is, it's obviously easy to spot inattention. And that's what he did. And so he said this. He explains that inattention is first the incapacity of attending with a necessary degree of constancy to any one object. And second, a total suspension of its effect on the brain. He basically just says that some problem in the nerves makes it almost impossible to focus or sustain attention on any kind of object in a constant way, and that you can either be born with it or contract it accidentally, like some sort of virus or bacteria. So, Sir Alexander Crichton spoke about this stuff in, I think, 1798, and doing some research online, a lot of people say that he was the first to give some sort of description of symptoms that are similar to ADHD as given in the DSM-5 or 4 or whatever, but I found that Melchior Adam Weikert spoke about something similar in a book called The Philosophical Doctor that was published in 1755, which, if true, makes him the first person to speak about this academically. In this book, he characterized the disorder as distractible by anything, even a person's own imagination, taking more effort to complete tasks, flighty, careless, work has many errors, and generally disorganized. What do you think? Should the first description of ADHD be attributed to Sir Alex or to Melchior Weikert? Okay, enough from academia. I only put it as the first part of this video so we can have an idea of the definitions and how it's described, etc. Now, what about art and culture? From doing some research, I found that everyone seems to subscribe to the idea that ADHD was first described in art and culture in a children's book by Heinrich Hoffmann in 1844. The book was called Fidgety Phil, not this Phil, this Phil. The whole title, Fidgety Phil, and the whole story kind of sells it as one of the pillars of ADHD's culture. The overall story goes like this. It's basically Phil sitting at a table and balancing on his chair, until he slips and falls and grabs the whole table with him, and it's like a whole chaos. Here are, in my opinion, the only two sentences in this story that is kind of referencing something similar to ADHD. But Fidgety Phil he won't sit still. See the naughty, restless child, growing still more rude and wild. That's it, 2 sentences. The event of balancing and falling and then grabbing the whole dinner table and all that is a very common sort of event. So the argument that this story is some sort of reference to ADHD is questionable at best. I mean, it's just like pulled by the hair. What about you on the other side of the camera? What do you think? Tell me your opinion in the comments. Okay, I hear you, that was centuries ago. But what about now? Well, there's this curious, almost satirical way ADHD is being referenced in Hollywood. In all these movies and shows like The Mentalist or Sherlock or Limitless or Dr. House and the list goes on. All these characters seem to all pay attention and notice every little detail, have some sort of impulsive behavior. They do things without care for other people's safety or their own safety. They have this like creative way of finding solutions, etc. Okay, I saw this intriguing thing online, but I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of conspiracy and say how your mirror neurons that you have in your mind learn behaviors and replicate them subconsciously, and that these shows actually trigger ADHD symptoms, because 1, I'm not a neuroscientist, and 2, I don't want to have Hollywood on my back, so I'm not going to talk about this. Forget about that, and let's go back to 4,000 years ago, to my personal favorite era, to see what mythology had to say about ADHD symptoms. Greece, with its beautiful culture, its rich history, funny collections of touristy t-shirts, and divine skies, gave us almost everything we know about psychology, through its mythology, monsters, but especially philosophers. And one of them was Theophrastus. So Theophrastus, which means divine speaker, was the student and successor of Aristotle. And philosophers at that time had way too much time. And what do you do when you have too much free time and no Fortnite? Well, you look at trees, you play with rocks, maybe even collect them and study them, you cut open animals, and you watch people. You watch people a lot. And Theophrastus did that. Theophrastus watched so many people that he started noticing patterns in their behaviors. He ended up writing a book with 15 archetypal characters. Very interesting collection of writing, very short read. Check it out. You might find yourself or people you know in there. Anyway, in his writing, he introduces the stupid man. And when doing some research, I found that just like Fidgety Phil, a lot of academics are attributing some descriptions of the stupid man to ADHD. So I thought we'd check it out. In The Stupid Man, you can read passages like, when he is defendant in an action and it is about to come on, he will forget it and go into the country. If he has been given anything and has put it away himself, he will look for it and be unable to find it. If he is cooking a leek himself in the country, he will put salt into the pot twice and make it uneatable. Okay, so here's the thing. If you read all the characters, and I think you should, you'll notice that some descriptions in other characters can be related to symptoms of ADHD. The other thing is that obviously we should all be careful to not distill the complexities of ADHD symptoms into these very simplified and surface level descriptions, because 1, ADHD is more complex than that, and 2, all these descriptions are geared towards the negative aspects of ADHD. So while all these descriptions by Theophrastus and everything we've seen so far in this video were geared towards the negative qualities of ADHD, and to balance a little bit the scale, I was wondering if there are any other symptoms that could be potentially framed as positive qualities. Enters Hermes, my favorite Greek god by far. While Hermes was known for his mischievous nature and even stepping out of his crib to steal Apollo's herd just out of impulse and to mess with him, Hermes was also known for his swift movement, quick wit, and being even depicted as very active. He had this non-stop energy and admirable swiftness. He was always on the move with an intriguing, versatile nature. In Norse mythology, we can think of Loki, the brother of Thor. While Loki was a trickster god with a penchant for chaos and unpredictable behavior, that same unpredictable behavior was his strength. So yeah, looking back, we can extract behaviors and characteristics from mythologies and literally assign them to any side of the equation, either the positive qualities or negative ones. And not just in mythology, we can literally do that with any cultural reference and even the academic ones. And it's exactly moments like these where we should be really careful of confirmation bias and not just start pulling things from here and there just to justify some assumption we have. And yes, while everyone pushes the idea that ADHD was present since the dawn of time, we should be critical of ourselves and of the conclusions we draw from available data. It's easier to look back and conclude that these references point to some sort of deficit of attention or hyperactivity disorder, but we tend to forget the historical context of these events, and we tend to forget the personal biases and assumptions of whoever wrote these things. So yeah, let's look at all this with a grain of salt and focus on what matters the most: solutions. That's it.